There we go. All right, folks, welcome to our February meeting of Twin Tiers Five Rivers chapter of Fly Fishers International. I'm TC Owens. I'm the vice president of the club, emceeing tonight as our president and fearless leader, Kirk Klingensmith, is on the road somewhere in Florida. We've got a great talk tonight with Karl Weixlmann, who is no stranger to this club, presented about a year ago on steelheading and how to read water, among a number of other things, and thrilled to have him back. So tonight we're meeting via Zoom, but next month in March we'll be meeting once again at the American Legion, and you can tune in via Zoom as well, but we encourage you to come out and join us in person at the Legion, have a beer, tip generously there, and talk fishing. If your mics aren't already muted, mute them. Please feel free to use the chat bar to ask any questions, or just unmute and ask when it at an appropriate moment. I'm going to move into some club announcements now. We've got some two really exciting programs coming up. March 6th will be, we're going to have Dave Rothrock, who is a club member of our club based in Jersey Shore, Pennsylvania area. He'll be coming up to talk with us about tying and fishing non-beaded nymphs and using drop shot techniques, and why, how, variety of stuff. Dave's a really knowledgeable angler. And then April 3rd, we'll have Lisa Green, who's a board member at the Canandaigua chapter of Trout Unlimited, also a very active member in Casting for Recovery, national nonprofit fly fishing organization that works with breast cancer survivors and connecting them with fly fishing. Lisa is a really accomplished angler, and she'll be talking about some of her confidence patterns that she uses. She actually taught my wife how to fish one afternoon, so it'll be great to have her down at the Legion. We've got a beginner fly tying class underway that's been going great. We do this virtually. It's been underway since mid-January, and will finish up at the end of this month. The club recently took a trip to Edison, to the Edison Fly Fishing Show in Edison, New Jersey. 18 of us went down between our club, the Erie chapter of FFI, and the Keystone Anglers Club, which is in northwestern Pennsylvania. We've got a hybrid master class coming up on the first Saturday in March. I believe it's March 4th, but don't quote me on that date. Eric Mastroberti, a really accomplished tyer, for whom probably needs no introduction to many of you, but he will be doing a tie-along session on deer hair flies and large streamers at Carrie's Brew House in Corning. That's something that's open to members, so feel free to, if you're not a member yet, encourage you to join our club. If we don't have it filled by mid-February, we'll open it up to non-members, but don't sit on it because it will likely fill up. On April 22nd this year, we will be doing our annual fly fishing school. This is our biggest revenue generator and our really a full day crash course, all you need to know to get started in fly fishing. Information can be found on our Facebook page. We ask for your help in recruiting folks. Word of mouth is the best way to get people into the academy. Yeah, help us spread the word. And if you've never attended before and interested, please sign up. Our spring rod raffle is underway. This is your chance to win a TFO rod of your choice. Tickets are 1 for $10, 3 for $20, or 6 for $35. And the winner will be drawn at our May program meeting, which is, as you know, we do that annually in partnership with Leon Chandler, chapter of Trout Unlimited. You can buy tickets at our website or in person at club events, or if you look, you can see there's that white and black box with a dinosaur in the middle on the screen. You can use your phone right now and put it in camera mode and take a picture of that little dinosaur, and it'll take you to a place where you can buy a ticket on the internet through our PayPal. All right, so without further ado, I want to introduce tonight's speaker, Karl Weixlmann. Karl Weixlmann is a fly fishing guide from Erie, Pennsylvania, who has guided for well over 2 decades. Karl grew up in Buffalo, fishing the Great Lakes tributaries, and has fished Naples and Catherine Creek in his youth. Karl is mainly known as a steelhead specialist, though he's an excellent smallmouth and pike guide as well. Karl has authored 2 books, which you can get through Amazon if you're interested. His published books include Great Lakes Steelhead, Salmon, and Trout, Essential Techniques for Fly Fishing the Tributaries, and Keystone Fly Fishing, the Ultimate Guide to Pennsylvania's Best Waters. He's a contributing writer for the Erie Times News and has published articles in Fly Fisherman, Pennsylvania Angler, and Outdoor Territory magazines. So without, on that note, Karl, I will kick it to you.
Well, hey, I thank you very much, TC Owens, and everybody from the club to hook up on a Zoom meeting tonight. I should actually have a 3rd book out this year in 2023. Maybe it'll come out in August. Keystone Fly Fishing was a really successful book where they took a lot of people from all over Pennsylvania, and each writer wrote about his region. And I wrote about our Northwest Pennsylvania section, including French Creek and all the steelhead tributaries. So because Keystone was really successful, I through Jay Nichols' Headwater Books, I completed, just before COVID, I completed another book, which is really modeled after Keystone Fly Fishing, where I cover every steelhead tributary from Buffalo, New York, all the way to Toledo, Ohio. So hopefully that'll be out this year. Look for it maybe late summer is when I hope it comes out before steelhead season starts. So, hey, I just want to thank you guys for inviting me. And let's talk about Presque Isle Bay. Next slide, please. So I believe you guys have titled this as Waiting Presque Isle Bay, and that's our prime species that everybody comes here to catch. Our big, what I would consider to be trophy class smallmouth bass. Lake Erie is an absolute smallmouth factory. The reason why the bass come into the bay is obviously for the spring spawn, We have a plethora of bait fish in the bay because the bay warms up a lot quicker than the main lake. So the bay sucks a lot of game fish in from Lake Erie early in the season. And it's a species here I didn't even mention. You can even catch steelhead in Presque Isle Bay during the colder water periods before the water temperature starts getting over 60, 65 degrees. They'll migrate back out into the lake. But virtually any freshwater game fish that you can think of that you can catch with a fly rod is going to be found in Presque Isle Bay. Primarily, everybody wants to come up and catch our big giant smallmouths. Most smallmouths probably average 2 to 4 pounds. 20-inch plus fish are a daily possibility. But let's keep going on. Next slide, please. We'll talk about smallmouth more later. I really want to thank Barry and Kathy Beck and my buddy Jack Hanrahan. Jack's a award-winning photojournalist here. He's a retired photojournalist for the Erie Times News, which is kind of how I got hooked up with them, writing. When newspapers were like real newspapers, it's like, print media has gone down the tubes. It really bothers me a lot that print media has gone down the tubes because I would always want to get up on a Sunday morning, open the paper and read it. And I normally did Sunday morning feature articles for the Erie Times News where I covered everything from Presque Isle Bay to carp to steelhead to you name it. Pretty much all of our fisheries that are available locally, which are extremely diverse in cold and warm water fisheries. and Barry and Kathy Beck came up a few years back and they did a photo shoot for Eastern Fly Fisherman, and they were kind enough to let me use their photography for this too. And first thing I'm going to tell you right now is I don't do that anymore. You know how many times I almost fell off that polling platform? You got to be kidding me, man. That is way too much work. Me and a buddy bought this 16 and a 17-foot beaver tail from a tarpon guy down in Florida. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to bring Florida fly fishing to Presque Isle Bay. And I've kind of done that. But you can see how close the beam is to the water line. There's maybe 12 inches there. I've had big waves come over the bow of that boat, and I'm like, I don't want this boat anymore. I'm going to fall off that polling platform and kill myself. Pulling a boat in the wind is terrible and a lot of hard work. The whole time I was doing that with Barry and Kathy Beck, Barry's like, ride that pole, Karl, ride that pole, ride that pole. So right now I fish out of a 20-foot Carolina JVX with a remote control Minn Kota Riptide on the bow. And I just press a button and it goes right where I want it to go. But it was fun doing that for a while. I just got to the point where it's kind of dangerous. What happens if you fall in Lake Erie doing that? So that was like an exploratory trip with that beaver tail to see how it worked out. And I quickly learned that I needed a much more seaworthy watercraft than a 17, 16 and a half foot beaver tail. So I gave up on the polling stuff, and I do it a lot easier with the remote control Riptide now. Next slide, please. So this is Presque Isle Peninsula right here. Presque Isle Peninsula is basically a 7.5 mile long sandbar that juts out into Lake Erie, and it forms Presque Isle Bay. On the south side of the bay is the city of Erie, Pennsylvania. Now, Presque Isle Bay has a lot of historic significance that people are totally unaware of. First of all, the entire United States naval fleet for the Great Lakes was built in the city of Erie on Presque Isle Bay. This is where our naval fleet in the War of 1812 sailed from. This is how Erie and Presque Isle Bay is how we won the War of 1812. And if we didn't win the War of 1812 by cutting off the British supply lines throughout the Great Lakes, there might not be a United States of America, gentlemen and ladies, if there are any ladies out there. That is the historical significance of Presque Isle Bay. A lot of people are unaware of that. There is a monument right on the point of Misery Bay to Perry, Commodore Admiral Perry. And the major battle was over in the Ohio section of Erie by the Bass Islands and Put-in Bay. But our naval fleet was built in Presque Isle Bay in the city of Erie and sailed out of Presque Isle Bay for the War of 1812. In fact, when the battleship Niagara was uncommissioned, they actually sunk the flagship Niagara in Misery Bay. It was later resurrected, and some of the original planks and wood were used for the replica that now sails throughout the Great Lakes during the tall ships parades. And it's really cool living in Erie, being out on Lake Erie or out in the bay fishing. Here comes the flagship Niagara right by your boat, and they're shooting off the cannon every now and again. And it's really, really, really neat. So there's historical significance here. It's always, Erie was actually the freshwater commercial fishing capital in the world at one point in time too. So it's a really neat place to live, obviously, with Lake Erie right out the back door, Presque Isle Bay out the back door. And I'm really blessed to live here. Next slide. So the peninsula itself was formed between, and this is not a long time in a geological sense, 12,000 to 3,500 years ago as the glaciers retreated. As the glaciers retreated, they eroded everything and actually created Lake Erie. Newly eroded sand was moved. How do I get out of all these people's pictures so I can read this? There we go. I figured that out. See, I'm not as dumb as I look. So the material was deposited into a 7-mile long, 32,000 acre sand peninsula. It became a state park in 1921, and in some years can get as many as 4 million visitors. That's as many visitors as Yellowstone National Park gets. Most of those visitors that come here to Erie are from Buffalo, Cleveland, or Pittsburgh, and they're mainly coming here because of our beautiful beaches that we have on the north side of the peninsula. Next slide, please. So scientists have found over 339 species of birds on Presque Isle Bay. The peninsula is actually part of the Atlantic Flyway. There's warblers, there's herons, bitterns, lots of different bird life floating through the area. Audubon Society has actually named it as one of the top bird watching destinations in North America. Next slide, please. My favorite bird out on the peninsula is the red-winged blackbird. When you hear the shrilling cry of a red-winged blackbird, you know what that means? That means it's time to go fishing on the bay, especially when you get the dogwoods blooming those white flowers. So when you got the red-winged blackbirds in the Catskills screaming at you, and I've never been able to literally write down what that sounds like. It's just a phenomenal thing. When you hear a red-winged blackbird in the cattails on the bay, it's time to go fishing. That means the smallmouth are getting ready to pour in the bay. So there's certain factors in nature that we look for, and that's certainly one of them. There's a good word for that. I forgot what it was, but there's a good word for using signs in nature to direct you where good fishing can be found. Next one. So this is the entrance to Presque Isle State Park. Before you head out on the park, number one thing I want to tell you is don't speed. I've been pulled over a couple of times. I know guys that have been ticketed. When you come out on the peninsula is really only a couple 100 yards wide at that point in time. And at one point in time was actually breached. The peninsula has been breached, like an ocean sandbar on Cape Cod. It was breached at one point in time, I believe in the early 1900s. But when you come out on the park, it's a DCN park. There's a whole new set of rules out there. No alcohol, no fishing with 100 feet of a lifeguard station or a designated swimming area. But just be careful heading out there. You don't want to be speeding. Next slide. So here's an actual map of Presque Isle Bay with the city of Erie on the south side of it. The north side of Presque Isle Peninsula is obviously Lake Erie. The good thing about the actual peninsula, with it being a 7.5 mile sandbar, the entire south and north shores of the peninsula can be waded and fly fished. If you fish spinning tackle, you can do that too. I'm not going to cough up all the good spots because I have this exact same slide towards the end of the presentation. And I'll go through some of these places and some of these areas and tell you what species that can be found in each area. And like all fishing, each species that we target on the bay, it's a seasonal fishery. The fish, they come and they go. Next slide, please. So they live in a variety of freshwater habitats. Within the peninsula, you can actually see the outer beaches, beautiful white sand beaches. That's where most of those 4 million people come from here in the summer to swim in Lake Erie, mostly during the months of July and August, I think is when we have the most visitors. There is an influx of people that start coming to the bay in May. And May is really the big kickoff of smallmouth season. Once that water temperature starts getting up around 60 degrees, a lot of those smallmouth will move shallow, and you can catch them blind casting, you can catch them sight casting. But we also have another wide variety of species that maybe some of you have fished for. Obviously, with all of these varied habitats, there's inshore bays. Here's Marina Bay right here in the middle. There's Misery Bay, there's Thompson's Bay, and there's a whole beautiful series of lagoons that you can't take a motorboat. You can use your electrics to get into the lagoons, but you can't take a motorboat back there. But it's extremely very good kayak fly fishing back in the lagoons. So most of the time, because the bay is that sandbar jutting out into Lake Erie, most of the time you're not going to have any problems wading throughout Presque Isle Bay. Now, we had some pretty high water over the past few years. I think we had record high water in right around 2020. And a lot of the areas that we would wade fish, you couldn't reach anymore. Fortunately, the Great Lakes have dropped down. I think the bay itself came down about a foot last year. So it's going to open up a lot more wade fishing opportunities that unfortunately a lot of people didn't have over the last few years. Fortunately, I got a boat, but the way I learned the bay was wading it. And to me, I equate it with fly fishing in salt water, only you're in fresh water. Same habitats that you have on Cape Cod that you fish for stripers, we have on the bay. You read the water on the bay just like you would a beach or a bay on Cape Cod. You got your sandbars, obviously light colored water. You always look for that deeper, darker, greener water in which to fish. Next slide. Early season. The water that's going to warm up first is going to be the lagoons and the northern parts of Misery Bay or Marina Bay. And that's where you're going to find your largemouth and northern pike. That's some of your best northern pike habitat that you're going to find are back in the lagoons and in the main bays of Misery Bay and Marina Bay. However, the biggest pike we catch are being caught off the main bay, where you have a sandbar that drops off into 18, 19, 20 feet of water. That's where we're catching our biggest northerns, is actually on main bay drop-offs. However, early in the season, that lagoon water, dark bottom bays, dark bottom, back in the lagoons, that water is going to warm up quick. It's going to bring in largemouth and northern pike pretty early in the season. I'm usually still steelhead fishing in April, sometimes into the first week of May. I wish I could get out on the bay more during April because I think we can get into some bigger pike. A lot of people think that pike spawn right after ice out. That's not true. My buddy Jack Hanrahan, who shot a lot of the photographs you'll see here, he caught a 41-incher with me off the boat this past spring. And that was a pre-spawn female full of eggs, second week of May on the main bay. So, you know, the notion that pike spawn right after ice out is not true. I also believe they spawn later in the season on the main bay, over the weed beds on the main bay. But early season, get back in lagoons. That's where the warmest water is going to be. That's where you're going to find warm water game fish. Next slide. So kayaks, like I said, you're not allowed to use a motorized boat in the lagoons. You can use your electric motors, but kayaks make really great vessels for exploring the lagoons. There's little islands back in the lagoons that you can kayak to and get out and wade these little islands back there. So it's really kind of neat going back to that saltwater kind of experience. It kind of feels like you're in the Everglades, going back in the Everglades. But there's northern pike, there's smallmouth bass, there's largemouth bass, and there's another species I'm going to talk about here called a bowfin. Next slide. This is a shot of Misery Bay right here. Misery Bay is a great spring bay for pike. I've actually seen the biggest muskies I've ever seen in my life. I've seen in Misery Bay. There's a YouTube video that I found this past summer of a guy throwing real big topwaters for muskies in Misery Bay. And it looks like a 45-incher blows up and misses his topwater. I think it was fishing something like a Zara spook, walk the dog with the Zara spook. And he actually videoed a muskie blowing up on a Zara spook. So that's Misery Bay right there. If you're coming in from Lake Erie, that's the first bay you're going to see. Although the bay itself has 3 launches on it if you use a motorized boat. If you have kayaks, you can launch a kayak pretty much anywhere on the peninsula. And like I said, you can virtually wade the entire south side and north side of the peninsula because it's just one big sandbar. The only place you're really going to get into a lot of wading problems as far as bottom firmness is at the head of the bay, at the farther western end of the bay. That's a lot of 1 foot to 2 foot mud up in the head of the bay. Great place to sight fish for mudding carp, but I've gotten a little bit stuck back in there at the head of the bay, at the western end of the peninsula, where you start to come out. Good early season spot too, because that water warms quick. But the Coast Guard has actually had to go and rescue some people that get stuck in that mud at the head of the bay. Aside from the head of the bay, you can wade the entire peninsula. There's also very, very good access for fly fishing off the city of Erie side. A lot of piers and jetties jut out from the city of Erie into the bay, and they make actually very good places to fly fish from. Next slide, Main Bay Flats. Main Bay Flats basically run from the third parking lot out all the way to the tip of the peninsula in Thompson's Bay. Main Bay Flats are anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 feet deep. The deepest part of Presque Isle Bay, believe it or not, is only 26, 27, 28 feet deep. And that real deep water is mostly found on the city side of the bay, where the Port Authority will occasionally bring in some big ships. One of the big industries in Erie, Pennsylvania was General Electric, where they actually made locomotives, and they would bring in the big ships and load these locomotives on the big ships and then ship them all over the world from the port of Erie, actually. But the main bay flats are where you're going to find most of your spring smallmouth action. If you have north winds, northwest winds, the entire south side of the peninsula is going to be very calm, very fishable. It's when you have the south winds that blow in to the south side of the peninsula, can sometimes make that water discolored. But most of the time we have westerly winds. I don't like fishing the bay very much on an east wind. I think the old adage that when the wind's from the east, the fish bite the least. That's very true on Presque Isle Bay, because that east wind, when the bay starts to stabilize, that east wind blows in cold water into Presque Isle Bay, and it can certainly shut the fishing down. Next slide. Horseshoe Pond.
Carl, I sorry to interrupt you
Sure,
real quick,
go ahead.
but before we get too far afield, there's a question from somebody named David asking about whether or not any of these spots that you're talking about, I think particularly in the main bay and Misery Bay, if there's private property.
On Presque Isle Peninsula, absolutely not. Presque Isle Peninsula is a state park.
Right.
What about the Erie side you were talking about?
The Erie side does have private property. There are some private marinas on the Erie side, but they've done a really, really good job of maintaining public access on the city of Erie side.
So it's posted pretty well, public access?
On the city side,
Yes,
there's plenty of places to fish on the city side.
but it's posted that way.
I would say the signage is, there's not signs that say you can fish here. What you will find is the marina areas are gated off, and there's certain marinas that you can't get into to fish. Obviously, there's private slip holders in these marinas. They obviously don't want fishing line and things getting tangled all up. But I've caught a ton of fish on the city side, fly fishing on the city side. And when we get back to that map of the bay, I'd be more than happy to point out those areas where I've had good luck fishing. Horseshoe Pond is a smaller bay that comes in off of Misery Bay. And that's a good early season spot too, because the water warms up pretty quick right there. I had a buddy of mine catch a 42-inch northern off of the channel that comes into Horseshoe Pond. I think it was last spring or the spring before. One thing that you might not know about Presque Isle Bay and the Great Lakes in general, there are currents that flow throughout the bay. Current does flow out from Horseshoe Pond into Misery Bay. Consequently, there is water that flows in. Most wave action and current action on the Great Lakes and in these larger bays is all caused by wind direction. Kind of depends which way the wind's blowing. But Horseshoe Pond's another good early season spot to hit. These houses are obviously private houses, but you can run a boat back in here. You can run a kayak back in here. The wading isn't quite as good here, but to the right of those houses that you see there, there's real nice sandbars over to the right. This picture is taken looking west, and there's good shore fishing along here before it gets weeded up on that side. Summer fly fishing destination, believe it or not, it's the outer beaches, the beaches that are on the Lake Erie side of Presque Isle Peninsula. On the Lake Erie side of Presque Isle State Park. What happens with the bay? Now, the largemouth fishing, you can catch largemouth all summer long in the main bay. Once that water gets around 70, 72 degrees, those smallmouth, they're gone. They're out of there. The pike, I don't know where they go in the summer. I'll be the first one to admit it. I have caught pike into the first couple of weeks of July, but where they go, I honestly don't know where they go. They got to be off these deep, deep weed lines in that 20 foot of water, 23 foot of water sections of the bay. I know some guys that troll muskies that are trolling all that deep water, but they're going to be a lot harder to hit with the fly rod during the summer. All of the best fishing on the interior bay is during the spring or during the fall. And I got more to talk about during the fall as we go through the pictures. But in the summertime, those main bay beaches are the place to fish. You can still catch smallmouth in the summer off some of those main lake beaches, especially where you see rocky areas like you do here by the lighthouse. There's a series of rock jetties that extend all around the Lake Erie side of Presque Isle Peninsula that are major fish attractors. Any log laying in the water is going to attract game fish, especially if you hike down to the east of Beach 10. You see a lot of trees in the water. Smallmouth will be caught mostly on the lakeside during the summer. But believe it or not, a lot of largemouths migrate out of the bay along the Lake Erie side of the peninsula. And it's really, really fun to sight cast to largemouths. There's actually largemouth blitzing that occurs when bass are blowing up on emerald shiners. And that occurs during the summer mornings and evenings too. Next slide, please. So let's go over our species. Largemouth bass, smallmouth, northern pike, musky, carp. That's the hardest fish to catch on a fly rod out there. Bowfin, sheep's head, freshwater jum for you guys that don't like to call them sheep's head, panfish, and gar. You can actually catch gar on flies out there. I don't do that a lot, but they're available too. Next slide.
Carl, quick question. Do you need anything besides a PA license and trout permit to fish the bay?
Great question. Thank God somebody asked it. When you fish the tributaries in Pennsylvania for steelhead or trout, or believe it or not, smallmouth bass, we have a major migration of smallmouth out of Lake Erie into our tributaries. A lot of people don't know about that. You need a Lake Erie permit when you fish Lake Erie, Presque Isle Bay, or any of the tributaries flowing into Lake Erie in the state of Pennsylvania. So yes, you need a Lake Erie permit. Now, if you're not steelhead fishing, you don't need a trout stamp. So you obviously wouldn't need a trout stamp to fish Presque Isle Bay. But yeah, you do need a Lake Erie permit. Thank you for that question. Next slide. So my favorite place to fish for the largemouths are back in the lagoons. There's some good early water or early spring topwater action that occurs back there. That mostly occurs at dusk. I think is the best topwater fishing. I'm not saying you can't catch bass on topwaters during the day, because you certainly can. But obviously that last hour before it's too black to see what's going on is the best time to fish those lagoons. Great bass fishing back there. You can even think you're down at Lake Okeechobee down in Florida, back in the lagoons. You can also feel like you're in a salt marsh back there. The lagoons extend from Misery Bay all the way to Marina Bay. There's a whole beautiful series of lagoons. So great largemouth fishing early season back in the lagoons. Favorite way to get some on top water. Next slide. Smallmouth. Everybody comes to Presque Isle Bay to catch smallmouth bass. Next slide. Why do you want to catch big smallmouths? Because they're smallmouth bass. I think they fight a lot harder than largemouths. It's the species most people come up here to fish for because the fishing can be excellent, 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 excellent when the bass are in. They also move very shallow. They'll come into 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet of water. Most of our flats are wadeable. When you're wading a flat, think of it like you're wading a flat down in the Keys in Florida. Always look for that darker water. Always target that darker water that you see. The darker water is going to mean a couple different things. It's going to mean more depth, or it's going to mean weeds or a darker rocky covered bottom. There's not a lot of rock structure in Presque Isle Bay because most of our sand flats are obviously sand, but dark water also indicates weed growth. So you want to target those kind of areas. This shot was actually taken, I think, second week of June. And I want you to take notice of what occurs come mid-June. If you look to the left of my hand holding the mouth on that bass, what do you see in the water? You see a lot of algae. So in summertime, we do have an obvious algae bloom on Presque Isle Bay and big algae blooms in Lake Erie itself, which have become an environmental problem, mostly in the western basin of Lake Erie. But I certainly believe that global warming is a part of that. I'm seeing much larger algae blooms occurring in Presque Isle Bay in the lake. And this shot, second week of June, look at the algae over to the left of that bass. And that's coming off the bottom because we're waiting. So big algae blooms occur once that water goes over 70 degrees. Algae blooms occur all over the place out there. Obviously, the best month to fish bass is going to be May, into maybe the first week or two of June. Our smallmouths average 2 to 4 pounds. 5 to 6 pounders are caught every year. You can catch them in knee-deep water. Sometimes you can see them swimming around. Sometimes you see them chasing bait. Sometimes you see emerald shiners flying out of the water, smallmouth gorging on them. Our smallmouth are really known for having small heads and big bodies. And the invasive species, gobies, invaded the Great Lakes, and they feed real heavy on gobies out in Lake Erie. So they're extremely, extremely, extremely healthy fish. And, I think Presque Isle Bay has become one of the premier destinations for smallmouth bass in the eastern United States. Unfortunately, Bassmasters magazine had a couple big articles on fishing Presque Isle Bay. Starting to see more pressure out there, but if you include the Lake Erie side of the peninsula, you basically have 14 miles of sandbar that you could wade and fly fish on the peninsula. Next slide. Once that water starts warming up, where do they go? They go out in the Lake Erie. So that's why one of the reasons why I up my boat, went and got a bigger boat. That's my Carolina JVX series. And once that bay gets warm, these fish move out of the bay. You'll find them starting in Lake Erie, where there are contour lines that drop off anywhere from 6 to 12 feet. I generally like, when I'm done fishing on the bay, I will mostly launch my boat out of northeast Pennsylvania, just because I'm finding better habitat as far as boulder fields. Right outside the bay, you're going to see a lot of flat shale on the bottom of Lake Erie. And I like to get by those big boulder fields, and I mostly fish out of northeast once I'm done with the bay. But our fish, average 2 to 4 pounds easy. Next slide. After mid-June, best small fishing will be found in the main lake. That's just what I talked about. If you have a boat, I fish it out of Northeast. If you don't have a boat, or if you're strictly going to be wade fishing, don't bother wade fishing Presque Isle Bay for smallmouth after mid-June. Like I said, once that water temperature gets around 70, 72, they're gone. To be honest with you, the biggest smallmouth I ever caught in the lake, I caught in 62 feet of water while we were fishing for yellow perch. So that shows you how deep those bass get on Lake Erie. Next slide. Northern
Carl, quick question coming in from the chat. In terms of like angler pressure, are there days of the week that are better to fish the bay than?
Oh yeah, it's like steelhead fishing on our tributaries, people. It's you want to fish Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and knock off Friday because a lot of people come up here on Friday. Yeah, obviously, like any destination fishery, Salmon River, your tributaries that go into the Finger Lakes, tributaries in the Lake Erie for steelhead fishing. Obviously, if you can get away during the week and fish it, or if you have a boat to haul it down here during the week, is much less crowded than the weekend. There's my favorite fish to catch on Presque Isle Bay right there, northern pike. Next slide, please. You can actually sight fish for northern pike on the bay. We were in Misery Bay one day. We were just kind of blind casting, sun coming up over our right shoulder from the east. And as these weed beds form, the pike will lay like right on top of these weed beds. And they look like a log laying on top of a weed bed. So we actually have some pretty good sight fishing opportunities for northerns, just like you do for every species on Presque Isle Bay, from about mid-April to mid-June. Same kind of thing. My problem is I wish I could fish pike more during the month of April than during the month of May, because pike are more of a cold water species. They like colder water than bass do. And boy, I wish I could launch my boat a lot more in April, or even just plain fish a lot more during April than I do in May and June. Pike they like colder water. They like water in the 55 to 60 degree range. Once that water gets up around 60 is when you see the smallmouths really pour in the bay and invade the flats. 59, 60 degrees, boom, they're coming in tight. But 55 to 60, I think that's when we catch some of our bigger pike. I'm not saying you can't catch them in May, you can't catch them in June, because you can, but hey, where they go in the summertime, I honestly don't know. Obviously, they're going to deep cold water. I don't think a lot of them migrate out into Lake Erie just because there's no northern pike habitat out there. Although I saw a small muskie in the Northeast Marina one year because there were weed beds starting to grow up in that marina. But mid-April through mid-June, as long as we have clean water, sometimes that wind dirties the water out there. You can actually sight fish for virtually every species in the bay, including carp, including bowfin, including largemouths, and every now and again, you'll see some muskies. Next slide. Muskies. Muskies are there. Do you catch a lot of muskies? No, you don't catch a lot of muskies. The native muskie that we have is a spotted Great Lakes muskie. I believe that they've been starting to, because the hatchery down at Tionesta here in northwestern Pennsylvania is the propagation headquarters for muskie rearing in the state of Pennsylvania. I think they're starting to plant some tiger muskies. I don't think they're stray. I think they're starting to plant them. I really don't have stocking numbers or anything. Presque Isle Bay traditionally in like the 50s, 60s was a great place to troll for muskies at one point in time, just like Pymatuming Reservoir in Pennsylvania. I used to read about Pymatuming Reservoir in Field and Stream magazines in the 70s on how great the muskie fishing was there. Do we have muskie? Yeah. Are you going to catch a lot of them? No. I'll get maybe 1 or 2 sight casting shots at them every year. Normally in the springtime, but they're there. And if you go to the next slide, please, I'll show you what they look like.
Carl, we have a question coming in. Do you use wire or bite tippet when you're fishing for smallmouth, just in case you encounter pike?
No. If I'm fishing for pike or muskie, I gotta have wire. You gotta have wire. My dad told me when I was 12 years old, when I'm pike fishing, I got to have wire. I've had northerns cut me off fishing for smallmouth. It's going to happen. But you know, what do you want to do? Take your poison, I think it is what I do. We'll talk about flies in a little while. But there's a certain fly out there that will catch everything. Maybe not a carp, because carp like more natural types of patterns. But a chartreuse over yellow clouds or minnow will catch everything that swims out there. And in some of these dockage areas, like in Marina Bay or off the boat docks on the peninsula, we'll throw clouds or minnows off these docks for early season smallmouth. And we'll get cut off by northerns. So, you know, most of the time, where you catch smallmouth on the main bay is not where you're going to catch a lot of northerns or muskies. Do I see northerns laid up on sandbars? Yeah. Have I seen muskies in 3 feet of water on a sandbar? Yeah. But, you know, if I'm fishing pike or muskie, I'm using wire, absolutely. If I'm fishing smallmouth, I'm not fishing wire. So I don't know if it's a pick your poison kind of thing or not. Mostly when you're fishing the main bay flats, you're not going to get cut off by a pike. Unless you're like over by the stink hole area where the drop-offs are real deep. Most of the time on the main bay flats, that's where you're going to see most of your carp and most of your smallmouth. So that's not normally where you're going to find a lot of the muskie and northern habitat. This muskie looks like a tiger muskie to me. That's why I'm wondering if they're planting tigers. I know they raise them down in Pymatuming. I know they've increased muskie stocking throughout northwestern Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, I don't have stocking numbers for you, but normally, if I catch a muskie, I'm normally throwing, you know, real big flies for pike, because there's a lot more pike in Presque Isle Bay than there are muskies. But can you catch them? Yes, they're there. I got friends of friends that have caught some absolutely giant muskies in Presque Isle Bay. Most of those guys are gear fishermen. Every now and again, one will hit a big pike fly. Carp, that's the hardest catch. That's the hardest fish to catch on the bay with the fly rod right there. Those main bay flats hold carp. You won't see them mudding per se because there's not a lot of mud on main bay flats, obviously. But in the head of the bay, where you have more of a muddy bottom, you can actually sight cast the mudding carp at the head of the bay. You can cast to cruising carp and carp that are feeding in the areas where you find weed growth on the main bay flats is where you'll see carp kind of puffing along the bottom. We don't see tailing carp. A lot of the times, right at the entrances to the Misery Bay and to the Marina Bay is where you'll find actually feeding carp. Carp that are spawning, that are pushing The big females up to the surface where you see all that carp splashing all over the place. Normally, I don't think you can get those carp to eat. I've thrown a lot of flies at them, can't get them to eat. But where you can find cruising carp, where they're cruising slow, looking for something over these darker bottom areas in the bay and at the entrances to Misery Bay and Marina Bay, is where you can find them feeding. That's where you're going to have a chance to actually catch them. I have caught some nice carp while I'm fishing the main bay flats for smallmouth. And if you go to the next slide, I'll show you what I use. See that fly hanging out of the lip of that one there? I tie these worm flies. It's just a black worm with spun black kind of flash material. You make it like a little dubbing brush on it and you spin it and wrap it and then tie it down to form a little tail with little lead eyes on it. And if you can find feeding carp on those main bay flats, and you can obviously see that's a nice hard sand bottom behind me, you want more of, you don't want that chartreuse and yellow clouser, because that doesn't look anything like a carp would eat on the bay. We have gobies, we have crayfish, we have leeches, we have those type of food sources. And that's really what you want to imitate when you're fly fishing for carp. And boy, I tell you, they go into your backing a lot better than a smallmouth does. Next slide. Bowfin. Oh, that's one of my favorite fish. Next slide. Look at that lime green color there, guys. Well, there's some older people in this Zoom. Anybody here? I'm going to go to my other screen here. Anybody here? I only see TC. Anybody here remember those Mr. Yuck stickers your mom would stick on like Drano? She'd stick those Mr. Yuck stickers on, dish cleaning material, bleach. You know what I'm talking about, those bottom. Remember those Mr. Yuck stickers? Well, that green Mr. Yuck sticker is personified by that lime slime green on the bottom of a male bowfin in the springtime when they're spawning. Mr. Yuck, keep away from me. A bowfin has teeth like a saltwater bluefish. I found a dried skull of a bowfin back in the lagoons one year, and that dried skull looked exactly like the dried skull of a T-Rex, with the big eye socket, the mandibles, and the teeth. You can't see the teeth here, but they got nasty teeth. Bowfin have been around since the day of the dinosaurs. They are like the perfect adaptable creature to all these different Great Lakes environments. Do you guys have them in the Finger Lakes? I would assume that you do, right? Anybody? Anyway, bowfin are one of the first species on the bay to move shallow. If it's a cold day and we're not catching bass and it's windy, well, you can always find some bowfin, usually in real shallow. And when I say shallow, I'm talking ankle deep to hip deep water. When I was in the Air Force down in Florida, we used to catch bowfin. While we fished for largemouth, flipping, jigging pigs or worms, we catch bowfin. We call them dogfish down there. The way I kind of found them, and when I came back to Erie, I didn't know bowfin were in Presque Isle Bay. I was wading back in the lagoons one day, and we have an invasive species that's called a phragmite. That's like a small bamboo stalk coming out of the sand. And these reeds extend, for a certain distance out from the shoreline. And I'm walking in water less than knee deep, and these things kept freaking bumping into my leg, shooting out, scaring the living hell out of me. What the hell was that? Scared the freaking shit out of me. Take a few more steps. What the hell was that? Scared the shit out of me. I'm thinking they're northern pike in shallow reeds spawning. I started slowing down and looking. And you know what I found? I found bowfin. The males in the spring turn that Mr. Yuck lime green, slime green color on the belly. They have a yellow spot on their tail ringed in black, a beautiful, they look like a tropical fish in the springtime. That's a picture of a female. The females look like dark anacondas, whereas the males light up. The females are actually a lot bigger. We've actually caught 30-inch long female bowfin, and they tend to be more cruisers. They kind of cruise along the edges of these shallow water reed beds on the main bay. The stink hole's got a lot of them. The lagoon's got a lot of them. In the main bay, you want to go back in these coves and look for them. They're a fascinating fish. They're not hard to catch. You jiggle a lead-eyed black bugger in front of them with rubber legs, and if you don't spook them, they'll pounce on it. They'll pounce on it really, really, really quick. And we generally use pretty heavy tippets, because once you hook them, you got to haul them out of that thick stuff really quick. Otherwise, they're just going to burrow in there and snap you off. So I really kind of miss bowfin fishing. I haven't done it as much as I used to, but bowfin are one of the first species that moves really shallow on Presque Isle Bay. Next slide. There's Jack with the bowfin. We're back in the reeds. You can actually hunt them down. Maybe that's kind of one of the reasons why I like to do it, is because it's kind of spot and stalk. You spot them, you stalk them, and then you make that fly presentation to them. Honest to goodness, when you see a bowfin like in the reeds back here, you actually sometimes, here's a technique we use if we don't see any cruisers. It'll be like dapping in a brook trout stream. We'll dangle that fly 5 feet, 4 feet, 3 feet off that rod tip, stick it back in the reeds and dangle it up and down, and watch a bowfin shoot out and gobble it right in front of you. And then when they take off, they leave a big pile, big V of spray when they fly out of that thick shit. So you got to use pretty heavy gear. I haven't been, even though bowfin have nasty, nasty teeth, I don't use wire on them. Most of the time, you're going to hook them in the corner of the mouth like this one here too. So I don't think wire is really needed for the bowfin. Although you really got to have it if you're fishing big pike, if you're fishing big pike and big musky. Next slide. Freshwater drum, the dreaded sheephead. The dreaded sheephead, the trash fish of Lake Erie. That trash fish on Lake Erie can yank you around pretty good. We've caught them fishing for largemouths back in the lagoons. We've caught them casting in the deep water troughs in the main bay. We've caught them over in Thompson's Bay. But I really believe the best place to catch these sheephead are off the Lake Erie side of Presque Isle Peninsula. Because once that water warms up in the bay, we get weeds, we get algae. I don't fish the bay a lot in July or August. I'm not saying that you can't still go out there and have good topwater fishing for largemouths early in the morning or late in the evening, because you can. But my favorite thing to do in the summer on the peninsula is the sight cast to cruising and bottom grubbing sheephead on the Lake Erie side of the peninsula. What they do is they cruise right along the inside trough before you get to your next offshore sandbar. So it's like striper fishing. You got that inside trough, and then you got an offshore sandbar, and then you got deeper water. Well, a lot of these sheephead are cruising along that inside trough, not the, yeah, there's going to be some farther out too. They'll come cruising along that inside trough, and you'll see them kind of grubbing along the bottom. Any kind of dark debris that's laying on the bottom, any patch of moss, patch of weeds attracts those fish. It's like anything else. You see dark water, throw over it, but you can actually sight fish to cruising, grubbing sheep's head on the main lake side of the peninsula in the summertime. It's a fun thing to do. I don't do it as much as I used to. Maybe I'll have to start doing it again. Next one. Panfish, bluegill, crappie, yellow perch are the big three. Next one. Springtime happiness is a bucket full of crappies. I don't know how you guys feel, but I like to go out, get a little bucket full of crappies every spring. Spring's the best time. Spring's the best time. I like to fish for them. I tie little marabou jigs underneath indicators and fish around the docks, fish around any kind of structure, any kind of trees, any kind of branches hanging in the water. And I think crappies are one of the mildest, most wonderful tasting freshwater fish you can eat. A lot of guys ice fish for them out here too. I've never caught a lot of them ice fishing on the bay, but I love to catch a little bucket of crappies every spring. Makes me feel like a kid all over again. Next slide. Obviously, everybody likes to catch bluegills on poppers. Great springtime fish. Now, one of the reasons why I put up the next two slides, show me the other slide too, please. Okay, go back to the one ahead of that. This picture was taken in November. There is a totally untouched pan fishery on Presque Isle Bay in the fall. I gotta hand it to my buddy Jack Hanrahan. He kind of discovered it this fall. One day he went out on the bay, started fishing some main bay sandbar drop-offs, and started going back into these northern ends of Misery Bay and Thompson's Bay, and they just hammered the living heck out of panfish in the first week of November. Go figure. And they're fishing shallow. They're fishing poppers. I had these guys in from Denmark. We're up here for a steelhead trip. Next slide, please. They caught over 50 yellow perch that day. They were fly fishing. And if you see the fly hanging out of that perch's mouth, it's a shrimp imitation. They were catching them on anything they threw out there. And this is right by one of the main sandbars, right by Stink Hole. 50 yellow perch in a day fly fishing. November is a steelhead month for me. I wanted to go out there and do it the next day. I just couldn't do it. It's steelhead season. But if you're up here steelhead fishing, well, maybe the water's low. Maybe the fishing's not that good. Presque Isle Peninsula is right down the road. The other species that you could target really well in the fall are going to be, once again, northern pike in Marina Bay and Misery Bay. I just don't do it because I'm steelhead fishing. I wish I could do it more often. But an unheralded, untapped panfish fishery is on Presque Isle Bay. Where are the leaves back there, guys? There's no leaves. There's no leaves on those trees. That's the first week of November. Maybe it was going into the second week. I think it was the first week. Great pan fishing on Presque Isle Bay. I'd rather eat a yellow perch than just about any other fish that swims, except for maybe saltwater fish. Bucket full of those in the month of November. Listen, we're almost all catch and release guys, right? But there's nothing wrong with taking home some yellow perch to eat. Living on Lake Erie is one of the benefits of being able to do that. Next slide. We'll talk a little bit about techniques and tackle, top water. I think we kind of covered that back in the lagoons. Stripping a clouser minnow will catch you every species that's out there along the habitat edges, weed lines, sight fishing. 7 to 9 weight rods. I actually normally fish 6s when I'm targeting bass, unless I'm in the lily pads or I'm in heavy cover. If you're fishing larger clouds or minnows, mostly 7 to 9 weight fly rods, 9 weight fly rods, obviously, if you're targeting a northern pike. Floating weight 4 fly lines will cover almost the entire early spring fishery. Clear tip intermediate fly lines. I like those clear tip Rio outbounds for covering water, because once again, think of it like you're fishing saltwater. You want to cover some water. If you're blind casting, covering drop-offs, covering troughs, covering dark green water, and shooting head systems work good on the bay too. A lot of people don't use them. Same thing like you would in saltwater. You want a stripping basket, intermediate most of the time. When I start fishing off of my boat, when I'm fishing in the deeper drop-off areas, I'll use 350 grain sinking heads to get those big pike and musky flies down. Like I said, most of the time I'm fishing for northerns when I'm fishing out there. And a lot of those deer hair flies, you need to get weight with a short leader, weight in the head of that grain, 350 grain head. You need to get that deer hair down along those drop-offs. Next one. Fly selection, to me, it's really, really simple. Chartreuse over yellow clouser will catch anything that swims out there. When I'm fishing for carp, I like more of the natural color flies. You can see the browns over here, some blacks mixed in, some brighter yellows and chartreuse over here. You really only need 3 colors. You need, well, maybe 4, but let's just start off with white. Caught a lot of pike on all white. Black, caught a lot of pike on all black. Catch a lot of bass on all black. Catch a lot of bass on all white. I love chartreuse over yellow. I like that a lot because I can see it in the water, see where it is, see what it's doing. And then maybe throw in some natural colored flies for carp. But really, all you need is white, black, maybe olive, maybe chartreuse. When I'm fishing the lagoons or any lily pad areas, I'm fishing black or I'm fishing yellow. We can go into top water, please. Next one. Black poppers, yellow poppers, white poppers. Will they eat frog colored poppers? Sure. But I'm a keep it simple kind of guy. I mean, a lot of the flies I've been tying lately for the bay. I'll grab a couple here. What else do you need, man? All white, all black, maybe some yellow mixed in here. I just picked these up. These are called dragon tails. I just picked them up. It's the first time I started tying with the dragon tail, but I saw a YouTube video where the action of those was absolutely amazing. So I started tying some big dragon tails. These are 4/0. I think those tails are about 8 inches long. Real simple hollow fly tie in the front, reverse bucktail hollow fly tie in the front. I've been using some brushes for the front to make it a little quicker, but I think those brushes, at least the ones I've been using, I think they'll hold a lot more water. Here's one tied with one of the brushes. I think that'll hold a lot more water than the bucktail. Here's one of the bucktails right here. And I think the bucktail will be easier to cast because it's going to be lighter. So I haven't used these. I haven't used these yet, but I'm going to this spring, see how they work. If anybody's had success with those dragon tails, let me know. And then I tie a lot of hollow fly ties, reverse bucktails. Pretty simple, pretty easy to tie, but very effective. Movement through the water is fantastic. Next slide, please. Dusk, you got to do the lagoons at dusk. Even if you're coming up, just coming here for smallmouth. That's another thing I don't do as much as I used to. Do the lagoons at dusk. It is just honesty. And I lived in Florida. Florida is a phenomenal largemouth state, right? I lived in Florida when I was in the Air Force. The best topwater largemouth fishing I've ever had in my life is in the lagoons at dusk during the month of May. If you're up here targeting smallmouth or whatever else you want to fish for, do the lagoons at dusk. It's very, very, very good fishing. And the fish are good size, 2 to 4 pounds. Next one. Stripping clouds or minnows, saltwater style. Use a stripping basket. It'll help, especially if you have a lot of wave action and the fly line doesn't get tangled around your thighs and legs and stuff like that. So if anybody out there is in the saltwater fly fishing, bring a lot of your saltwater techniques into fly fishing Lake Erie and Presque Isle Bay and the entire peninsula. That's what I enjoy so much about it, because I had just come back from living in New England for 10 years. And I'm right back in Cape Cod doing it all over again. I'm just catching different kinds of fish. Stripping clouds or minnows, count them down, try different strip rates, different sink rates, different techniques. Obviously, you've heard this a million times until you find what's working. Next one. Sight fishing, if you have the right conditions, sight fishing can be excellent. Obviously, you want a nice, sunny, calm day for that to be the most effective technique to use. You can sight fish for every single species that we talked about. They're there. You just have the right conditions. You just have to have the right conditions to do it. And like I said, when I started, I'm getting ready to fall off that polling platform. I'm glad I got rid of that boat. Next slide. Flies, poppers, deer hair bugs, clouds or minnows, deceivers, bunny bugs. Anybody out there have that Barry Reynolds book, Pike on the Fly? That was one of the earlier pike fly fishing books that came out. The best fly that he said that you can use for northern pike is a bunny bug. A bunny bug is a big rabbit strip. Here's an example of a double bunny bug. That's 2 rabbit strips glued together. But his bunny bug was a single black rabbit strip coming off the back of it with a side cut zonker strip, a cross cut zonker strip for wrapping up the shank like a hackle. And he said, that's my #1 fly to use for northern pike. And you darn right, a black bunny bug is probably the best fly that I fished on Presque Isle Bay for northern pike. You know, now we're getting into reverse bucktail, hollow fly ties, all these other things, and everybody's kind of overlooking the original, what I would call the original big northern pike fly, a black bunny bug. I'm thinking that these the problem with rabbit and with the black bunny bug, especially if you tie big ones, those flies I just showed you are tied on 4-aught hooks. If you tie big ones, that rabbit hair gets so wet and it gets so heavy. It's like casting a wet rag. But oh my God, when you see that ripple of that buddy bug coming through the water, you're like, no wonder they trounce it. No wonder they slam the hell out of it. So I'm just hoping that these hollow fly, reverse bucktail style flies, with that big long tail hanging over there that's supposed to go like this through the water, I hope it's going to be a little bit easier to cast than a buddy bug. I'm not shying away from the buddy bug. I'm just, because as far as I'm concerned, that's probably the best fly you can throw for pike. I'm just trying to find a replacement that's a little bit easier to cast. Next slide. Deer hair, bass bugs, and poppers. Everybody's got them in their box, I'm sure. They all work. Throw them back in the lagoons or Misery Bay or Marina Bay. That's where most of your largemouth habitat is early in the spring. In the summer, obviously, we're going to have pretty major weed growth on the bay. If you're fishing summer bass, summer largemouth on the bay, look for the holes in the weed beds. Look for the holes in the weed beds. And obviously, early morning or evening. Next one, please. Clouds or minnows, there's my favorite hanging out of that bass's mouth, chartreuse and yellow. I really like the chartreuse and yellow. They, old Lefty Cray, if it ain't chartreuse, it ain't no use. I also like a couple of minnow type of clouds or minnows, a green over white, olive over white. Sometimes I'll throw in some orange into a clouser, make it look like a juvenile yellow perch, since small yellow perch are a major forage species on the bay. And then on the back left-hand side of that box, you'll see some black flies and some more natural flies, some more olives, something more natural that I'll use for carp fishing. Deceivers, good old Lefty's deceiver, another fly that'll catch any fish that swims. That's a yellow, olive, and orange perch imitation. I know a lot of ice guys out on the bay. We haven't had good ice for a long time, but they put these cameras down in the bottom of the bay when they're ice fishing. You can see little baby perch darting around all over the place with these aquaview cameras. They're called aquaviews. Little baby perch are all over the entire bottom of Presque Isle Bay. So anything that imitates a yellow perch is obviously a great fly to use for predatory fish, smallmouth, largemouth, northern pike, or musky. I haven't caught a bowfin on a deceiver yet, but maybe I'll give that a try soon. I have had big bowfin come up and hit a big black bunny bug that I was stripping for northern pike. They definitely love that movement. And I think bowfin are more of like a bottom feeder. They're not like a fish that chases schools of emerald shiners around. So more anything that's black with legs on it will catch a bowfin, but the deceivers will catch anything else out there. Next one. Spring, ice out to early May. I think I mentioned that steelhead. They're all over Presque Isle Bay in the springtime. I just don't fish it that much early in the spring. Northern pike, lagoons, going to warm up quicker ahead of the bay. Water's going to warm up quicker at the western end of the bay. Largemouth bass, lagoons and marina. Misery Bay, head of the bay. Obviously, we want that darker bottom that heats up that water the quickest. That's going to bring the fish in the fastest. Next one. April to early May. Main Bay, deep channels, troughs, and drop-offs in 8 to 20 feet of water. You're going to need a boat to do that unless you're fishing from the city side. There's places on the city side off of public docks. They put up a couple new, not jetty systems, but there's some concrete sections that jut out on the city side where you can fly fish off. And that's where you're going to hit some of your deeper water. I've actually caught, now I'm a fly fishing guy, and I fly fished since I was 12, but I'm not like one of those snotty fly rod guys that say, hey, if you have a spinning rod, you're doing it wrong. Years ago, I used to go off these docks on the bayside and throw spoons for steelhead in the early 80s. Little Cleo spoon, throw it out there, let it sink, and then start cranking it in. I caught some really, really, really big smallmouth, pre-spawn smallmouth, throwing spoons off the city side of the bay. And that's where you're getting into some of your deeper waters on the city side of the bay. April, early May, Bowfin lagoons too. Next slide. That's a female bowfin. I told you they look a lot darker than those males. They actually get a lot bigger than that. And that is how shallow. Remember I said they move in real shallow earlier than any other species? There is no leaves on these trees right here. This photograph was shot, I believe, in maybe the first or second week of April. Those bowfin come in shallow really, really early. There's those reeds I was talking. They're actually called Phragmites. I think you can Google it up. It's an invasive species that they're actually trying to get rid of on the bay. But early season, shallow water, that's where you're going to find the bowfin. Next one. Mid-May to mid-June. Steelhead are gone. Northern pike and musky. They're going to drop out of lagoons. They're going to you're going to find them on main bay weed lines, where you find deeper water. One of my favorite spots, the water comes off of a sandbar and goes into about 17 feet of water. That's where we catch most of our bigger northerns. Once that bay water temperature gets near 60, smallmouth bass will be all over the flats. Once it gets up to around 72, boom, they're gone. Next one. Mid-May to mid-June, largemouth entire bay, smallmouth entire bay. Remember how I said around mid-June, that's when we have that algae growth start to occur. So I don't fish the bay too much after mid-June. I think I said I go out fishing in the main lake at that time. Or I start fishing those Lake Erie side beaches, the main body of the lake, the north side of the peninsula. Next one. Big trophy smallmouth we have up here. This is what everybody wants to catch, a 4, 5, 6 pounder. I think I boga gripped a 6 pound, 2 ouncer off of my boat this past year. We get some really big smallmouth. And I don't know where else you can wade fish in an intercoastal Great Lakes system and catch smallmouth bass like this. You could do it on Lake St. Clair. But Lake St. Clair, you need a boat for Lake St. Clair. I don't think the wade fishing opportunities are near as good on Lake St. Clair as they are on Presque Isle Peninsula. And that's Jack Hanrahan that's provided a lot of this photography. Yep. Next one. Summer, mid-June, early July, bass move to cooler water and deep weed lines near the channel. This is that channel that comes in and out of Lake Erie in the Presque Isle Bay. Early morning, late evening, best fishing. Fish begin to blitz bait. I didn't talk too much about that. Bass do start blitzing bait, not just in the summer. They start blitzing them. I'd start saying like right around early June, we'll see some blitzing occur in the bay. And I didn't mention one other species. I knew I screwed up somewhere. White bass will come into the bay chasing big schools of emerald shiners. saltwater fishing once again. Look for bait flying out of the water. These are bass that are aggressively pursuing schools of emerald shiners, and they're blowing up all over them. Kirk might have witnessed that because he was here late June one year, early July. He called me up. He says, "How's the bass fishing?" I'm like, "It sucks. Smallmouth are gone." Goes, "Anything going on?" I'm like, "Yeah, I think there's largemouth blitzing out on bait out on Thompson's Bay." And yeah, there's largemouth that blitz bait out on Thompson's Bay too. Big balls of emerald shiners attract game fish. I mean, it's food. But it does occur in the summer. It's mostly an early morning thing. I've had really, really good fly fishing outside the channel in the main lake for white bass blitzing on bait with gulls diving into the bait. Same thing you see in salt water. Catch 2 at a time on clouds or minnows. It's pretty crazy. But you need a boat for that. But you know what? You know what I see more of going on the bay? Kayaks. A lot of, they're coming out with all these new fangled kayaks now that are great watercraft, that are stable watercraft, that'll hold your rod, that you can paddle around with your feet. I'm seeing an increase of kayaks being used, which is a good thing, but those guys from West Virginia really need to learn how to slow down their bass boats. They really, really do. Just because you have a bass boat doesn't mean you should go 60 miles an hour. So summer, mid-June, early July, there are fish blitzing on bait. Strictly an early morning thing. July through August, outer beaches, main lake, rock piles, jetties. Those jetties that jut out there attract bait fish and bass. You can sight cast a freshwater sheephead like we talked about. Sometimes you'll see carp cruising on the Lake Erie side. I see a lot more sight casting opportunities for sheephead than I do for carp on the main lake side. Next one. Now, if you come out here and the lake looks like that, I usually turn around and go home. But that's just a beautiful sunset on Lake Erie. Erie, Pennsylvania is known for, I mean, every city along the Great Lakes says that they're the best sunset, that city has the best sunset. Well, Erie, Pennsylvania has the best sunset of any city around the Great Lakes. It's just spectacular out there at sunset. Rough water. I don't like fishing rough water here. We took the picture because the sunset was beautiful. Next one. But in the lagoons, you gosh darn right you want to be back there at sunset, because that's when I found the best fishing. Evenings and early mornings are best for fly fishing during the summertime. That's obvious anywhere in the country, I think. By the way, that was the front cover of Eastern Fly Fisherman magazine at one point in time. Next one. And then now this is the sunrise. I wanted to show you the sunset and the sunrise. This picture was taken, I think we got up at like 5:30 to get this shot. This was taken looking to the east on the sunrise over Presque Isle Bay and Lake Erie. If you're up here, don't go to dinner at sunset or eat breakfast at sunrise, because to me, it's one of the most beautiful things that you can observe in your lifetime, whether you're fishing or not. Next slide. Okay, let's go over some hot spots on Presque Isle Bay. Let's start at the left-hand side of the screen. You see where it says the head of the bay, real good weed beds. I'm looking at right where beach 1 is, head of the bay. Really good early season pike spot. Remember that it's real muddy back there. It's real. Yeah, thanks. Real muddy back there. We used to be able to access the head of the bay just to the west of the Erie Yacht Club. There's a water treatment plant there that we used to be able to drive down and access the head of the bay where the sand part of the bay starts. Can't get down there anymore since 9/11. So we're going to mostly access the bay from the peninsula heading out. The Vista boat launch up here to the right, there's a small little boat launch there. You're not going to be able to launch a bass boat there. It's a good spot to launch kayaks. Sometimes I can get my boat in there because I have a very shallow draft boat. It's not the best boat, but you see a little peninsula jutting out right above it. Yes, sir. You see that little lagoon that comes back in there? Locals, we call that the stink hole. We call that the stink hole because when the city of Erie was the largest commercial freshwater fish processing place in the entire world, they would dump all their sturgeon carcasses in the stink hole. That corner right there, just above the stink hole, up above a little bit more, yep, that corner right there, you have a sandbar that drops off real deep right there. And off that point there is where they were hammering all those perch, waiting off that point this past November. The shoreline from the stink hole all the way over to the park office, this is a rock riprap shoreline. That's a really hard place to wade. Right by the lily pond is a better place for wade fishing. You get more of a sand bottom right there. It's real hard to wade most of that area from the stink hole up to the lily pond and the park office. Okay, we'll go up to the Niagara boat launch. There's some decent wade fishing by the Niagara boat launch. It's not my favorite place to wade fish. My favorite place to wade fish is a Main Bay Flats. But we'll continue going down past the ferry dock. The ferry dock is a slip where a taxi comes across from the city of Erie and drops people off at the ferry dock. There's a big channel at the ferry dock, and there's some docks just to the right of where that ferry dock is. If you're throwing clousers off the ferry dock, you're probably going to get cut off by northern pike. Sometimes in the channel at the ferry dock, you can actually see pike laying on these sandbars. But they come into that ferry dock area because there's some really good early season weed growth that occurs there. So we're going to go from the ferry dock all the way to the Presque Isle boat launch, all the way in front of Marina Lake here. But I'm on the Main Bay side. I'm not in the marina yet. I call those the pump house flats. From the West Pier to the ferry dock is excellent wade fishing. Real good, firm, hard sand bottom. You could wade pretty far out there. The last few years, we had really high water, but in a lot of these areas you couldn't wade in. But last year, the bay went down about a foot. So pretty good wade fishing along there. Marina Lake and Marina Bay, we call it. Good early season smallmouth fishing, or excuse me, largemouth. It's not a real good smallmouth bay because most of the habitat is big weed beds, real big weed beds. Good pike fishing early in the season. Good largemouth early in the season. And you see where it says duck pond, that connects the lagoons. That's one of the areas that connects all the way through that entire lagoon system. Okay, we're going to head over to the East Pier, between the East Pier and Perry's Monument. Those are the Main Bay Flats. I call that the Main Bay Flats. That's the longest stretch of flats that are wadeable in Presque Isle Bay. And because you're close to the channel coming in from Lake Erie, those smallmouth hit those flats first before they spread out anywhere else on the entire bay. That entire flat is wadeable. There's going to be troughs. There's going to be some sandbars. Sometimes these sandbars shift around. Depends which way, depends how bad our storms have been. But generally, when we've had low water years, you could wade fish out there. You could walk out there almost a quarter of a mile before you start hitting some of the drop-offs. Also, by the East Pier and West Piers, there's real good drop-offs right there. Real good sandbars that drop off in the deep water right there. We'll go over in the Misery Bay. We talked about the lagoons. Misery Bay, biggest muskies I've ever seen in my life are in Misery Bay. It's a good all-species bay. It's good carp, smallmouth, largemouth. Not a lot of bowfin in Misery Bay, mostly over by the stink hole and then the lagoons. Horseshoe Pond, early season hotspot. Water warms up real quick in there. I'm going to get rid of my pictures here because now we're going to jump. Now we're going to jump over to Thompson's Bay. Beach 11. This entire shoreline here is wadeable. There used to be a sandbar. This is where these sandbars get changed up every year. There used to be a sandbar that came right across the bay. It's no longer, you're no longer able to get out on that sandbar. You got to be careful in Thompson's Bay. There's some deep drop-offs. There's a big deep drop-off that comes right across the bay right here. Yep, right where your cursor is. There's a big drop off that comes right off of there. Pike like hanging off that drop off. It's like I go back to that saltwater fishing. The water's moving into Thompson's Bay. That's a great place to fish because it's flushing bait fish off that drop off into the main portion of the bay. Let's go up to the lakeside. Beach 10. Let's go over to Beach 10. That's probably one of my favorite beaches to fish in the summertime. One of the reasons why I like to fish it is because usually the storms that we have on Lake Erie blow a lot of dead trees into these sand beaches. And any tree laying off these sand beaches is a magnet for largemouth bass in the summertime. Bass will migrate out of Presque Isle Bay too, seeking colder water. And there's a rock jetty we used to be able to wade out to right here. I'm not too sure if you can get out to it this year. I haven't been out there for a year or two, but that's a great place to sight cast to. You can even sight cast a largemouth there, plus sheephead. Lighthouse is pretty good because it's got more of the rocky structure. Now remember, there's rock jetties all along here. Some of them you can wade to, some of them you can't. If you wade out to a rock jetty and the lifeguard's there, they're going to blow the whistle. So do it really early in the morning. That's what I do before the lifeguards even get there. The rule on the lakeside is 100 feet away from a designated swimming area. I've had lifeguards blow whistles at me, even though I know I'm over 100 feet away from a designated swimming area. Well, they're kids. They'll call the one of the park rangers out. And usually if I say, well, here's the rules of the peninsula, here's the rules of the state park, 100 feet away from a swimming area, I'm 100 feet away from a swimming area. And then they leave you alone. But those lifeguards are young. They don't know any better. Now let's travel down. Now remember, there's jetties all along these beaches, but let's travel west and go all the way down by Beach 2 and Beach number 1. There's a couple of small jetties that jut out, Beach 2 and Beach 1. Sometimes they'll have smallmouth right off the ends of those jetties. Some of these jetties are submerged. Between Beach 1 and Beach 2, believe it or not, we also catch a lot of largemouths in the summertime. So let's say you take your family here swimming in the summertime. Well, you can always fish these Lake Erie beaches for bass and sheephead too. So between beach 1 and beach 2 is pretty good underwater habitat for bass, and it's kind of hard to believe you can catch a largemouth casting in the middle of Lake Erie, but you can do it. So let's go to the city side. Remember I said there's all kinds of places to fish from the city side. You got the Erie Public Dock, right by over here to the east, to the right by the Maritime Museum. There you go. These marinas will fit before they start throwing boats into these marinas. You can walk around them and fish them. And these marinas will draw in pike really, really quick. I see a lot of guys throwing big hardware into some of these marina areas by the Maritime Museum here. That water warms up quick in these marinas. It draws in pike pretty early in the season. Wolverine Park, this is great public access all along through here. Chestnut Street Park, boat launch. There's another little rock jetty right here. You can walk right there. You can walk right out on that little rock jetty that's here that you can't see and catch smallmouth right there. Look at all the great access here. Liberty Park, Perry's Landing Marina. The only place on the bay where we've lost access is this area by the Erie Yacht Club. We've lost a lot of access. Trail to the bay from the Bayfront Highway. Yeah, that goes down by the mouth of Cascade Creek. There's a little bit of a sandbar right here with a drop off, but I've never really fished that a lot down there. Believe it or not, steelhead will run up in the Cascade Creek, believe it or not. Steelhead will go up in there. In fact, there's probably steelhead in there right now. So that covers pretty much everything on Presque Isle Bay, on where to fish, how to fish, and what species we have available. So if you have any questions, we'll go to the next slide. That's not my phone number anymore. My phone number right now, if anybody needs it, is 814-504-8264. That's an old landline, which shows you that nobody uses landlines anymore, I think. I don't know. Next slide.
That's it, Carl.
Is that it?
That's it.
Well, hey, thank you guys. I really appreciate you having me back.
Of course.
Thank you. Maybe some of these things, some of the things I talked about, you guys can utilize in your Finger Lakes. There's got to be Bowfin in those Finger Lakes. Looking shallow, reedy areas, and you should be able to find Bowfin. Any questions, gentlemen or ladies?
Any questions?
I think if you want to take your family on vacation, take them to Presque Isle State Park. Mm-hmm. It's a phenomenal natural resource that we have right here in Erie, and if I wanted to, I can ride my bike to the entrance to the state park from my house right now. So it's pretty neat having all these diverse fisheries living in Erie. Steelhead out the back door, trophy smallmouth and northerns out the front door. I'm a happy guy.
Yeah. Cool. Well, if there are no questions for Carl, then we'll wrap up. Thank you, Carl, so much. Always a real pleasure to have you.
Hey, well, thanks for having me again.
Always learn so much.
To get invited back twice is quite becoming of me. So thank you.
All right.
Hey guys,
have a good night, and join us next week or next month. March we'll be at the American Legion with Dave Rothrock. So come on out. We'll see you then. All right, folks. Have a good night. Take care.
Hey guys.